The air in the glass conference room was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken tension. It was a space I knew well, but one I had never truly occupied. Today, I was a ghost, a shadow in an all-black outfit seated in a chair against the back wall, strategically positioned to be ignored. On the far side of a ridiculously long mahogany table, the board members of Halston Creative sat with their arms crossed, their Rolexes and Patek Philippe's ticking away the seconds of my life's work. My former team, the people who once shared lukewarm coffee with me in the break room, were at the front, beaming under the recessed lighting. They were presenting my pitch, my strategy, my sleepless nights and my caffeine-fueled breakthroughs, all packaged neatly into a presentation that bore their names, not mine. Brock Halston, my ex-manager, was the maestro of this charade, his voice smooth and confident as he walked them through slides I had designed until my eyes burned. He pointed to a market penetration graph I had meticulously researched, and the board members nodded, their expressions a mixture of impressed avarice. Not a single person glanced my way. I wasn't a contributor, I was furniture. I kept my breathing even, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I had learned to master the art of serene invisibility. But then the client, the reason for this whole dog and pony show, raised a hand. He was Elijah Rowan, a tech billionaire whose name was whispered with a kind of reverence in our industry. He had been listening intently, his face unreadable. The room fell silent. Brock's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "An impressive presentation, Mr. Halston," Elijah said, his voice quiet yet commanding enough to suck all the air out of the room. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then he delivered the line that would shatter their universe. "We'd like to speak directly with the owner, Miss Briar Maddox." Every head swiveled. It was a comical yet terrifyingly satisfying, synchronized movement. $40,000 suits rustled as a sea of confused, suddenly panicked faces turned to stare at the back of the room, to stare at me. Jaws literally dropped. Brock's mouth hung open in a perfect silent O, his face draining of all its smug color. The chief financial officer, a man who had once asked me to fetch him a different brand of sparkling water because the one in the fridge was too aggressive, went pale. I let the moment hang there, a beautiful, perfect tableau of their shock. Then I rose from my chair. Slowly, calmly, I smoothed down my black dress, my movements deliberate and unhurried. This was the moment I had worked for, the moment I had built in the dark, in secret, while they slept. This was the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times, because this story, this victory, it didn't begin in a boardroom filled with shattered egos. It began 2 years ago, in a hotel parking lot, with tears streaming down my face, and a humiliation so profound it felt like it had been branded onto my soul. It was my sister Sienna's wedding. Or rather, it was her new mother-in-law, Vanessa Kent's wedding, and Sienna was just the star attraction. It was a monument to the Kent family's wealth, a sprawling, ostentatious affair at a 5-star hotel with ice sculptures and a string quartet playing vaguely familiar pop songs. I was the maid of honor, a title that in my case meant unpaid event staff. While Sienna was getting her makeup professionally contoured, I was confirming the floral arrangements. While she was sipping champagne with her bridesmaids, I was hunting down extra chairs for guests who hadn't RSVP'd. I didn't mind, truly. I loved my sister, and I wanted her day to be perfect. But my role was slowly, insidiously, being defined for me by everyone else. I was in the corner of the grand ballroom, pouring a glass of water for an elderly uncle, when Vanessa Kent glided over, her diamonds catching the light. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a faint dismissive sneer. She leaned toward one of her society friends and said, just loud enough for me to hear, "That's all she's good for, really. A helper." Her friend tittered, a sound like cracking ice. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I was Briar Maddox, a project manager with a degree and 5 years of experience. But in this glittering world my sister had married into, I was just the help. Later during the reception, the MC invited friends and family to offer toasts. My heart hammered in my chest, but I had prepared something, a sweet, funny memory from our childhood. I stood up, clutching my champagne flute, and made my way toward the microphone. Before I could even take 2 steps, a hand landed on my arm. It was Brock Halston, my manager, who was a guest of the groom. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. "Don't embarrass yourself, Briar," he whispered, his voice laced with a cruel amusement. "Let the grown-ups handle this." He wasn't just talking about the toast, he was talking about everything. My job, my life, my place in the world. He turned to the table of his colleagues who all snickered. I saw my sister, Sienna, across the room. She saw what happened. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. She looked away, her expression a mask of uncomfortable avoidance. She chose her new shiny life over her own sister. That was the cut that went deepest. The laughter of Brock's table followed me as I turned and walked away, my half-written toast clutched in my hand. I didn't stop until I burst through the double doors of the ballroom, past the smiling staff, and into the cool dark air of the hotel parking lot. There, leaning against the cold metal of a stranger's car, I finally broke. The tears came, hot and furious, carving black streaks of mascara down my cheeks. I wasn't just crying over a ruined toast, I was crying for the 1,000 tiny cuts of humiliation, for being made to feel small and worthless by the very people who were supposed to love and respect me. I was sobbing for the girl who was always told to be quiet, to be helpful, to not take up too much space. That night, in that lonely parking lot, something inside me hardened. The tears eventually stopped, leaving a cold, clear resolve in their place. I wiped my puffy eyes with the back of my hand, took a deep, shuddering breath, and made a vow. It wasn't a loud, dramatic declaration. It was a quiet, deadly promise to myself. I will build something so strong, so successful, so completely and utterly mine, that no one can ever take it from me again. I will become so powerful that their judgment, their laughter, their dismissal will be nothing more than the pathetic buzzing of insects. They would never see me coming. The 2 years that followed were a blur of beige walls and the low, constant hum of the office HVAC system. My life became a monotonous cycle, a grinding existence that threatened to sand away any sharp edges I had left. My days were spent in service to Brock Halston, a man whose primary skill was taking credit for the work of others. My cubicle, a cramped space just outside the men's restroom, was a testament to my status in the corporate food chain. The air was a stale cocktail of burnt coffee from the break room, and the sharp chemical tang of toner from the copy machine. I ate my sad desk lunches alone, usually a hastily prepared salad in a Tupperware container, while my colleagues went out for long, boisterous meals where they undoubtedly cemented the alliances that would help them climb the next rung of the ladder. They had a nickname for me, Miss PowerPoint. It was both a description of my primary function and a dismissive jab at my perceived lack of strategic importance. "Hey, Miss PowerPoint," a sales guy would call out, "can you whip up some slides for the quarterly review? Make 'em pop." I was the go-to person for making things look pretty, for organizing other people's chaotic thoughts into a coherent presentation. But when it came time to actually speak to those presentations, I was invisible. In meetings, I would try to contribute, to offer an idea or a piece of data I'd uncovered. Brock would often let me speak for a few seconds before cutting me off with a patronizing, "Thanks, Briar, we'll circle back to that," and then he would never circle back. The others would follow his lead, their eyes glazing over the moment I opened my mouth. It was a slow, soul-crushing erosion of my confidence. I would leave the office every evening feeling hollowed out, a ghost in a sensible blazer. But the moment I walked through the door of my small apartment, a different life began. The exhaustion would fall away, replaced by a frenetic, desperate energy. While the city slept, I worked. My tiny living room became my university, my laboratory, my training ground. I poured every spare cent and every waking moment into my secret education. I took online courses in corporate finance, brand strategy, and advanced negotiation tactics. I read books on leadership, on building a business from the ground up, on psychological warfare in the boardroom. My television gathered dust. My social life withered and died. My world shrank to the glowing screen of my laptop and the stack of textbooks on my coffee table. I even started recording my own voice on my phone, practicing pitches and presentations over and over again, listening back to identify the slight tremor of uncertainty, the upward inflection that betrayed a lack of confidence. I worked to lower the timbre of my voice, to speak with a calm, measured authority that I didn't yet feel but was determined to fake until it became real. The breaking point, the final shove I needed, came on a Tuesday. I had spent 2 weeks working on a comprehensive proposal for a new client, a project I had poured my heart and soul into. I did the market research, I built the financial models, I designed the entire campaign strategy from scratch. It was, I knew, the best work I had ever done. I printed it out, bound it neatly, and placed it on Brock's desk with a surge of nervous pride. "Here's that proposal for the Peterson account," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He didn't even look up from his computer. "Right, I'll look it over," he mumbled, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. A week later, he called a team meeting. He stood at the front of the conference room, my proposal in his hands, its pages now bearing the Halston Creative logo. He presented it as his own. Every word, every data point, every strategic insight. He didn't even bother to change the phrasing. He just read my work aloud, basking in the praise of his superiors. I sat there, my blood turning to ice water in my veins, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and call him a fraud, a thief, a pathetic imitation of a leader, but I didn't. I just sat there, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, and I watched him steal my future. That night I went home and cried, but these were not the hot tears of humiliation from the wedding. These were cold, hard tears of pure rage. The rage clarified everything. Quitting would be a surrender. It would be letting him win. No, I would not give him that satisfaction. I would stay, and I would learn, and I would use his own arrogance against him. After the tears subsided, I opened my laptop. The anger had burned away all the fear, all the self-doubt. With steady hands, I navigated to the state's business registration portal. A single blinking cursor on a blank form waited for me. Name of business entity. I took a deep breath and typed, MADDOX, Maddox Strategies, LLC. I filled in the rest of the information, paid the registration fee with my credit card, and clicked Submit. A confirmation page appeared on the screen. It was done. It was real. I was no longer just Miss PowerPoint. I was the founder and CEO of my own company. They just didn't know it yet. My new life as a secret CEO began on the bottom rung of the gig economy. I haunted freelance websites like a ghost, scrolling through endless posts seeking cheap labor for soul-crushing tasks. Need 10 articles on dog grooming, 500 words each, $5 per article. Design a logo for my cat's Instagram page, budget $15. It was a digital wasteland of low expectations and even lower pay. But I needed a client, any client, to make Maddox Strategies LLC more than just a piece of paper and a file on my laptop. I finally landed a small, unassuming gig, create a one-page strategic marketing map for a small consulting firm. The pay was a paltry $75. The brief was vague, the client's existing materials were a mess, but it was a start. I threw myself into it, treating that $75 project like it was a multi-million-dollar account. I stayed up all night, cross-referencing industry data, refining the target audience, and designing a clean, intuitive, and powerful visual map of the strategy. I over-delivered, not because I was a people-pleaser, but because it was my name, Maddox, on the line now. The next day, I received an email from the client. I expected a simple thanks, or perhaps a request for a minor revision. Instead, the message read, "This is exceptional, far beyond what I expected. Can we schedule a video call for this afternoon? I want to know who you are." The name on the email signature was Frankie Wynn. A quick search revealed he wasn't just some small-time consultant. Frankie Wynn was a legend. He was a retired advertising executive from the golden age of Madison Avenue, a titan who had built and sold 2 incredibly successful agencies. He had disappeared from the public eye years ago, and now, apparently, he was dabbling on freelance sites out of sheer boredom. I spent the next 4 hours in a state of controlled panic. I cleaned my tiny apartment, set up my laptop in the corner with the least cluttered background, and changed my shirt 3 times. When the video call connected, I found myself looking at a man in his late 60s with a face like a roadmap of old battles and a pair of eyes that seemed to see right through my carefully constructed professional facade. His office was a museum of his own success, walls covered in framed awards and vintage campaign posters. "Frankie Wynne," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Briar Maddox," I replied, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. He held up a printout of the strategy map I had sent him. "I've paid people $50,000 for work that wasn't half as sharp as this," he stated, not as a compliment but as a matter of fact. "So I'll ask you again. Where did you learn to do this?" I hesitated, the truth feeling inadequate. "In the trenches, I guess," I finally said. "I work as a project manager at an agency. The real learning comes from trial, and a lot of error." He nodded slowly, stroking his chin. "I can see the trial. I can see the raw talent. I also see that you're playing in the minor leagues when you should be gearing up for the World Series." My heart started beating a little faster. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine through the screen. "I'm old, I'm rich, and I'm bored, Briar. I don't need more money. What I need is a good project, and I think you're a good project." I was speechless. I had been called the help, Miss PowerPoint, and a useless nobody. No one had ever called me a good project. "I'm not looking for an intern, and I'm not here to hand out hugs or tell you you're a special snowflake," he continued, his tone brutally direct. "I see a return on investment in you. I see hunger. I see someone who's been underestimated, and that's the most dangerous kind of person in this business. So here's my offer. I'll mentor you. I'll give you the benefit of 40 years of kicking ass and taking names. But I have expectations. This isn't a charity." He paused, letting his words sink in. The air in my apartment felt electric. This was a lifeline I had never dared to imagine. What kind of expectations?" I managed to ask. A slow smile spread across his face. "I like that. Straight to business. Here's your first assignment. Forget these $75 jobs. I want you to secure one real client, for a real fee, within the next 30 days. I don't care who it is. A dentist, a dog walker, a candlestick maker. But they have to sign a contract, and they have to pay you what you're worth. You have 1 month. Call me when it's done." The call ended, leaving me staring at my own reflection on the dark screen. The terror was immense, but for the first time in a very long time, it was overshadowed by a flicker of exhilarating hope. Frankie Wynne didn't see an assistant. He saw ROI, and I was determined to give him the return of a lifetime. The first 30 days under Frankie's invisible, demanding tutelage were a masterclass in failure. It turned out that having a registered LLC and a legendary mentor on speed dial didn't magically make clients appear. My first real attempt was a cold call to a local chain of boutique fitness studios. Armed with a script Frankie had forced me to memorize and rehearse, I managed to get the owner on the phone. My voice, which had sounded so steady and authoritative in my apartment, trembled the moment I heard her impatient, "What can I do for you?" I fumbled my pitch, mixed up my numbers, and when she asked me my standard fee, I panicked. The number that came out of my mouth was so low, it was basically an apology for taking up her time. "I see," she said, her tone dripping with the condescension of someone who smelled blood in the water. "Send me a proposal. We'll take a look." I spent 2 days crafting the perfect proposal, only to be met with a week of complete silence. I followed up, my emails sinking into the digital abyss. Frankie's response to my dejected report was swift and merciless. "She didn't respect you because you didn't respect yourself," he said over the phone. "You priced yourself like a clearance item, so she treated you like one. Never apologize for your value, Briar. State your price with your chest out. If they walk, they weren't your client anyway." Next. My second attempt was even more mortifying. I found a promising lead, a new tech startup that needed a full branding package. This time, I nailed the initial call. I was confident, my pricing was firm, and they seemed impressed. They loved my initial ideas. "This is great," the founder said enthusiastically. "Could you just work up a few sample logos and a mock-up of the website homepage so we can get a feel for your style? A free sample, just to make sure we're aligned before we sign the contract." I remembered Frankie's warning, But the lure of a real exciting client was too strong. I spent a week working tirelessly, pouring my creativity into a suite of beautiful, compelling designs. I sent them over, proud and hopeful. They ghosted me. A week later, I saw their new website go live. It featured a logo that was a blatant, almost identical copy of one of my free samples. The sting of that theft was worse than the rejection. It was a violation. When I told Frankie, I expected him to yell. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. "Good," he finally said. "Let that burn. Let it teach you. The world is full of vampires, kid. Your talent is your blood. Don't give it away for free." Now, what did you learn? I took a shaky breath. Contracts first. Money up front. No work begins until a deposit is paid. "Hallelujah," he said dryly. "Now you're thinking like a business owner and not a desperate artist. Get back on the horse." The horse felt more like a terrifying, bucking bronco, but I climbed back on. Frankie started drilling me relentlessly. We had daily check-in calls. He made me role-play client negotiations until I could counter any objection in my sleep. We dissected my pitch deck line by line. "Too passive," he'd bark. "Use active verbs. Don't say we could help you achieve. Say we will deliver." He taught me how to read the subtle cues in a person's voice, how to identify their pain points and position myself as the only possible solution. He was a brutal, demanding, and brilliant teacher. Slowly, something inside me began to shift. The desperation started to fade, replaced by a hardened, pragmatic focus. I wasn't just a freelancer anymore, I was a strategist. The third time was the charm. The client was a local wedding photographer, a woman with incredible talent but zero business acumen. Her website was dated, her branding was non-existent, and she was losing clients to slicker, more modern competitors. I listened to her for an hour, letting her pour out all her frustrations. Then calmly and confidently, I laid out my plan. I stated my price, a number that made my own palms sweat, and I didn't flinch. I sent over a contract with a clause requiring a 50% deposit up front. She signed it the next day. The email notification that her deposit had landed in my Maddox Strategies bank account was the single most validating moment of my life. I didn't go out and celebrate. I didn't buy myself something nice. I sat at my laptop and immediately reinvested every single cent. I bought premium subscriptions to market research software. I paid for a professional project management tool. And then I made my first hires. I went back to the same freelance websites where I had started, but this time I was the one posting the job. I found two brilliant, hungry graphic designers from Serbia who were tired of being lowballed. I hired a sharp, witty ex-copywriter from Atlanta who had been laid off from her agency job. We were a small, scattered team of underdogs, connected only by Slack channels and a shared desire to prove everyone wrong. We launched the Maddox Strategies website, a sleek, professional site that looked like it belonged to a major agency, not a woman working from her living room. And then our first official, non-Frankie-initiated client signed on. Then another, and another. Meanwhile, on the other side of the universe, my sister Sienna continued to document her life of leisure on social media. One afternoon, while taking a rare 5-minute break, I scrolled through my feed. There was a photo of her and Brock Halston, of all people, clinking champagne glasses on a terrace overlooking the city. Brock had apparently been promoted to a partner at his firm. The caption, written by my own sister, read, "So proud of my brilliant husband and our amazing friends like Brock, building real empires, while my little sis is busy with her Pinterest projects. Haha, love you, Bri." The haha felt like a slap in the face. Pinterest projects. She had reduced my sleepless nights, my hard-won clients, my entire burgeoning business to a hobby for bored housewives. I closed the app, the familiar sting of her dismissal flaring up. But this time, it wasn't followed by tears. It was followed by a cold, quiet fire. I opened my project management software and assigned a new task to my copywriter in Atlanta. "Draft press release templates for major client acquisitions," I typed. "Let's get ready to make some noise." She might call it a Pinterest project now, but soon she wouldn't have a choice but to call it an empire. As Maddox Strategies began to gain traction, the financial pressures mounted. I was paying my freelancers on time, every time, because I knew what it was like to be on the other side of that invoice. I was investing in the best software, the best data sources, and the best training materials. But the cash flow was a tightrope walk over a canyon of debt. My personal savings had evaporated. My rent was due in a week, and the number in my checking account was terrifyingly small. I was living on instant noodles and the sheer stubborn will to succeed. It was in this moment of peak desperation that the devil came knocking, and he came in the form of a sleek, unsolicited email. The sender was the CEO of a rival digital marketing agency, a firm known for its aggressive growth and flashy client roster. They had, the email explained, noticed my work. They were impressed by the quality and the results I was achieving for my small clients. They had a proposition. They wanted to white label my services. I would do all the strategic work, all the heavy lifting, and they would present it to their large, high-paying clients as their own. In return, they would pay me a flat, substantial fee for each project, a fee that would solve all of my immediate financial problems and then some. It was a golden ticket, a lifeline thrown to me just as the waters were rising. My heart pounded as I read the proposal. The money was life-changing. It meant I could pay my rent for the next 6 months. It meant I could hire another freelancer. It meant I could finally breathe. We had a video call the next day. The CEO was slick, charming, and a little too polished. He talked about synergy and disruption and all the other buzzwords that set off alarm bells in my head. As we delved into the specifics of how the partnership would work, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. He mentioned their proprietary data gathering techniques, and when I pressed for details, he became evasive. "It's our secret sauce," he said with a wink. That night, I couldn't sleep. The offer was still on the table, a glittering temptation, but his evasiveness bothered me. I started digging. I spent hours combing through tech forums, reading anonymous employee reviews on Glassdoor, and searching for any litigation filed against his company. It took me until 3 in the morning, but I finally found it. Buried deep in a thread on a data privacy subreddit was a detailed post by a former employee, a whistleblower. He laid it all out. The agency was using spyware to scrape client data from their competitors. They were harvesting personal information, selling it to third-party brokers, and using unethical, borderline illegal methods to guarantee their clients' success. Their secret sauce wasn't strategy, it was theft. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the stark choice in front of me. On one hand, there was financial salvation. On the other, there was my integrity. I thought about Brock, about how it felt to have my work stolen and presented as his own. This was different, of course. I would be a willing participant, a paid accomplice, but it felt just as dirty. It felt like a betrayal of everything I was trying to build, a company with the name Maddox on it, a name I wanted to stand for something. My rent was due. The landlord had already sent a reminder. I could almost feel the eviction notice in my hand, but then I pictured myself working for that slick CEO, knowing that my strategies were being fueled by stolen information. The thought made me feel sick. With a heavy heart and a trembling hand, I typed out a polite, firm email. "Thank you for the generous offer," I wrote, "but after careful consideration, I've decided that this partnership is not the right fit for Maddox Strategies at this time." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The next morning, I called Frankie. I didn't tell him about my rent or the instant noodles. I just laid out the situation, the offer, my research, my refusal. I braced myself for a lecture on being naive, on letting a big fish get away. He was silent for a full minute after I finished. "In 1994, he finally said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it, I was faced with a similar choice. A massive tobacco company wanted to hire my agency. The money was obscene. It would have made us the biggest firm in New York overnight, but they wanted us to create a campaign that specifically targeted teenagers. My partners wanted to do it. They saw the dollar signs. I refused." He paused. "They voted me out of my own company. They took the account. The agency grew, but it was rotten from the inside. It collapsed under a mountain of lawsuits 3 years later. I lost everything. But I kept my name." He cleared his throat. "You did the right thing, Breyer. A business without integrity is just a house of cards. It looks good until the first gust of wind." I hung up the phone and for the second time in my life, I cried. But these weren't the tears of humiliation in the parking lot or the tears of rage in my apartment. These were quiet tears of relief, and for the first time of pride. I was still broke, I still didn't know how I was going to pay my rent, but I owned my name, and that, I was beginning to realize, was the most valuable asset I had. The pride of my moral victory was quickly replaced by the cold, hard reality of the marketplace. I had done the right thing, but doing the right thing didn't pay the bills. I doubled my efforts, channeling my financial anxiety into a relentless pursuit of new clients. After weeks of pitching, I landed what felt like my biggest break yet, a 6-month contract with a chain of luxury boutique hotels. It was the kind of client that would put Maddox Strategies on the map. The proposal I created was a work of art, a masterpiece of strategy and design that I was immensely proud of. The hotel's marketing director was ecstatic. The contract was drawn up, ready to be signed. Then, silence. A week went by. My follow-up emails went unanswered. My calls went straight to voicemail. The marketing director, who had been so enthusiastic, had suddenly become a ghost. A sick feeling began to creep into my gut. 2 weeks later, I saw it. A press release, shared on LinkedIn. Halston Creative, Brock's firm, proudly announced their new partnership with the very same luxury hotel chain. My blood ran cold. But the real gut punch came when I clicked through to an article in an industry magazine. It detailed the brilliant new strategy Halston Creative was implementing for the hotels. And there it was, laid out in bullet points, my strategy, my ideas, my words. They hadn't just stolen the client, they had stolen my entire playbook. Brock had somehow found out I was bidding for the account, swooped in and undercut me, using my own proposal as his pitch. I stared at the screen, a white-hot rage building inside me until I couldn't contain it anymore. I let out a guttural scream, a raw animal sound of pure frustration, and slammed my laptop shut. I grabbed the nearest pillow from my couch and screamed into it until my throat was raw and my lungs ached. It was the wedding all over again, but 1,000 times worse. This wasn't just a stolen toast, this was grand larceny of my intellectual property, a theft that cost me a foundational client and pushed my company to the brink of collapse. All the old feelings came rushing back, the helplessness, the injustice, the searing humiliation. I wanted revenge. I wanted to burn his entire agency to the ground. I spent a full day wallowing in my anger, pacing my apartment like a caged tiger, but as the rage began to cool, it left behind something else, a cold, hard clarity. Screaming into a pillow wouldn't get my client back. Seeking revenge in a fit of anger would only make me look volatile and unprofessional. Brock fought with brute force and theft. I had to fight smarter. I remembered something Frankie had told me during one of our sessions. The loudest guy in the room is usually the weakest, he'd said. Real power doesn't need to shout, it moves in silence. I called him, my voice still hoarse but my mind sharp. I explained what had happened, not with anger, but with the detached precision of a surgeon describing a wound. He listened patiently. So, he said when I was done, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to cry? Or are you going to build? I'm going to build, I said, the words feeling more certain than anything I'd ever said. But I need to build differently. I need to build a fortress. Good, he said. Now you're ready for the real lessons. That evening marked a turning point in my education. Frankie stopped teaching me about pitching and branding. Instead, he began to teach me about power. He gave me a crash course in corporate structuring, finance, and the art of the acquisition. He taught me about silent partnerships, shell corporations, and how to use investment capital to gain leverage. He explained how the biggest sharks in the business didn't just compete with their rivals, they bought them, dismantled them, or absorbed them. Brock thinks he's playing checkers, Frankie explained, his voice energized by the subject. He's moving his pieces one at a time, stealing your pawns when he can. You need to start playing chess. You need to be thinking 10 moves ahead. You don't win by taking his king directly. You win by controlling the entire board. As he spoke, a new idea began to form in my mind. It was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. Revenge wasn't about screaming. It wasn't about a single dramatic confrontation. Revenge was a long-term business strategy. Brock had stolen my proposal, but he had also revealed his playbook. He was arrogant, overconfident, and he still saw me as a nobody, a freelancer he could crush under his heel. He would never see me as a threat on his own level. He would never see me coming. That night, I didn't scream into a pillow. I opened a new folder on my computer. I labeled it Project Nightingale. It was a strategy not just to build my own company, but to quietly, systematically, and legally dismantle his. Project Nightingale was my silent declaration of war. It was a campaign waged not in angry emails or public callouts, but in the quiet, sterile language of contracts, spreadsheets, and investment agreements. The first phase was about building a war chest and a network of alliances. With Frankie's introductions, I began to connect with his old network of contacts, seasoned investors, retired executives, and legal sharks who were bored with their golf games and hungry for a new fight. They were intrigued by my story, but they were sold on my numbers. I wasn't just a woman with a grudge. I was a CEO with a proven track record of high-margin returns, even at a small scale. I pitched them not on revenge but on opportunity. I showed them the inefficiencies and vulnerabilities in mid-level agencies like Halston Creative, firms that were over-leveraged and run by arrogant, short-sighted partners like Brock. My first major move was to partner with a small, private equity group Frankie knew. With their capital, Maddox Strategies didn't just compete for clients anymore. We started acquiring. We bought a majority stake in a struggling but talented web development firm in Chicago, rebranding its services under the Maddox umbrella. We acquired a boutique PR agency in Texas, whose owner was looking to retire. With each acquisition, my company grew not just in size but in capabilities. We were no longer just a strategy firm, we were becoming a full-service powerhouse. All of this was done quietly, through shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. On the surface, Maddox Strategies was still a rising, but modest firm. In reality, I was building a hidden empire, a network of interconnected companies that Brock would never think to associate with the Miss PowerPoint he so casually dismissed. The ultimate chess move came when Frankie identified a key vulnerability. Brock's agency, Halston Creative, had one major competitor in the city, a slightly larger, older firm called Sterling Price. The two agencies were constantly at war, bidding for the same clients, poaching each other's talent. Frankie discovered, through his sources, that Sterling Price was overextended. They had lost a major client and were quietly seeking a capital infusion to stay afloat. "This is your checkmate opportunity," Frankie told me over a secure line. We structured the deal with the precision of a military operation. Through a holding company, owned by my private equity partners, we made an offer to buy a significant, non-controlling, but influential share of Sterling Price. The deal came with one major condition, buried deep in the legal documents: a seat on their board for a representative of our choosing, appointed under a strict and binding NDA. That representative, of course, would be me. The deal closed. My name never appeared on any public document. To the world, a faceless investment group had simply propped up Halston Creative's biggest rival. Brock probably celebrated the news, thinking his competitor was weakened. He had no idea that his old assistant now had access to their entire strategic direction. It was during this period of silent empire building that I had the most important meeting of my career. It wasn't in a boardroom, but in a quiet corner of a discreet coffee shop. The man across the table was Elijah Rohn, the billionaire founder of a revolutionary tech company called Kronos. He had been referred to me by one of Frankie's investor contacts. He was looking for a new agency to handle the global launch of his flagship product, a campaign worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He wasn't interested in the big, lumbering legacy agencies. He was looking for something new, something sharp, something hungry. I didn't pitch him with a flashy presentation. I just talked to him. I laid out my vision, my philosophy of building brands from a core of integrity and telling stories that resonated on a human level. I showed him the work we had done, the results we had achieved for our smaller clients. I spoke not as a desperate freelancer trying to land a big fish, but as a fellow founder. He listened, asking sharp, insightful questions. He didn't care about the size of my office. He cared about the size of my ideas. At the end of our 2-hour meeting, he nodded slowly. "I'm impressed, Miss Maddox," he said, "very impressed." A month later, after a rigorous vetting process that my team and I passed with flying colors, the news came. Maddox Strategies had landed the Kronos campaign. It was the kind of account that would make us a global player overnight, but Elijah Rohn, a master strategist in his own right, had a peculiar condition. He knew the history. He knew about Brock. He had heard the whispers through the industry grapevine. "I'm currently being courted by several agencies who are looking for a merger or acquisition to handle my scale," he explained, a glint in his eye. "Halston Creative is one of them. They've been trying to get a meeting with me for months. So here is my condition. I want the final official pitch for the Kronos campaign to be presented at their office during their board meeting. I want to see how the strategy you built holds up when presented by others. Let's call it an audition for everyone involved." I understood immediately. He wasn't just giving me a contract, he was giving me a stage for the perfect final act of Project Nightingale. The email arrived on a Monday morning, a small digital grenade landing in my inbox. The sender was Brock Halston. The subject line read, "Invitation, Client Pitch Support." My heart hammered against my ribs, a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. I opened it. The message was written in his signature tone of breezy, condescending authority. "Breyer," it began. The casual use of my first name, a deliberate reminder of my former station. "Good news. We're in the final running for the Kronos account, Elijah Rowan's company. Huge deal. The final pitch is to their executive team and our board next Friday. I remembered your PowerPoint skills and thought you might be a good fit for a freelance support role on this one. We need someone to polish the deck and be on hand to assist with the technical side of the presentation. Let me know your day rate." He still thought I was a freelancer. He was inviting me, the secret owner of his biggest competitor and the architect of the very campaign he was trying to win, to come and help him run the projector. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. He had no idea that the entire meeting was a setup, orchestrated by his target client. He had no idea that he was auditioning for a role in a company I now indirectly controlled. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a fleeting moment, I was tempted to write back a scathing reply, to unleash 2 years of pent-up rage and reveal everything in a single blistering email. But I could hear Frankie's voice in my head, "Power moves in silence." I took a deep breath, calmed my racing pulse, and typed a simple, professional response. "Thank you for the opportunity, Brock. I am available on Friday. My day rate is enclosed. Please find attached my standard freelance contract for your review." I attached the contract for Maddox Strategies LLC. I knew he wouldn't read it. He would pass it to an assistant or a junior legal counsel who would glance at the name, assume it was my personal freelancing entity, and process it without a second thought. The arrogance that had been his greatest weapon was now my greatest asset. I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-focused calm. I coordinated with my team, finalizing every detail of the Kronos strategy. I had a final discreet call with Elijah Rowan to confirm the plan. We were perfectly aligned. The day of the meeting, I chose my outfit with care. Not a power suit, not a statement dress. I wore a simple, elegant, and entirely forgettable all-black dress. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to be the last person anyone would notice. When I arrived at the Halston Creative offices, the receptionist gave me a visitor's pass without looking up. The building was a shrine to Brock's ego, the walls lined with awards that I now knew were built on the backs of people like me. I was directed to the main conference room to set up. As I was connecting my laptop to the main screen, a woman entered the room. It was Lorna Cade, the long-serving board secretary. She was a quiet, observant woman who had been with the company for decades, a fixture who saw everything and said nothing. She had always been kind to me, in a small, discreet way. A shared smile in the elevator, a quiet good morning when others ignored me. She walked over to the coffee station, and as she passed me, she paused. She glanced at the name on the freelance contract sitting on the table, then she looked at me. Her eyes, usually so placid, widened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of understanding, of shock, and then, of something that looked like admiration. A slow, tiny smile touched the corners of her lips. She didn't say a word. She just gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, and continued on her way. She knew. She was the first one inside these walls to see the full picture, the first to understand that the assistant in the corner was about to burn the whole house down, and in that moment, I knew I had an ally. I sat down in my designated chair at the back of the room, opened my laptop, and waited. I was calm. I was ready. The ghost was about to become the machine. The board members filed in, exuding an aura of self-importance. They were the titans of this small universe, men and women who had no idea their kingdom was built on a foundation of sand. Brock strode in last, soaking up the attention like a sponge. He was in his element, a peacock preening for an audience, and then, to my surprise, my sister Sienna walked in with him. She was clinging to his arm, looking every bit the part of the successful PR director, a title Brock had obviously gifted her. She scanned the room, her eyes briefly flicking past me without a hint of recognition, as if I were a coat rack. My own sister. The betrayal, fresh and sharp, added another layer of fuel to the cold fire in my belly. Elijah Rowan and his two executives arrived precisely on time. The room snapped to attention. Brock immediately went into schmooze mode, his voice oozing a practiced charm that made my skin crawl. "Elijah, so glad we could finally make this happen," he boomed, shaking his hand with too much force. "We've assembled our entire senior board to welcome you. And this is my PR director, Sienna Kent." Sienna smiled brightly. "A pleasure to meet you. We are all so excited about the potential synergies." I almost choked on the word synergies. Before the presentation began, Brock gestured vaguely towards the back of the room. "And we've got Briar Maddox on hand to help with the technical side of things," he announced to the room at large. "Just a helper to make sure everything runs smoothly." A few board members glanced back, their faces blank and uninterested, before turning their attention back to the front. A helper. The word hung in the air, a final, perfect insult. The setup was complete. The pitch began. Brock took center stage, his voice confident as he clicked through the opening slides of the presentation. My presentation. He spoke about market disruption and consumer engagement. He used my phrases, my data points, my strategic pillars. He was a masterful performer. I had to give him that. He delivered the lines with a conviction that almost made them sound like his own. I watched Elijah Rowan's face. It was a perfect mask of polite interest. He nodded occasionally, his expression unreadable, giving nothing away. Sienna sat next to Brock, looking at him with an expression of pure adoration, completely oblivious to the fact that she was witnessing the greatest fraud of her husband's friend's career. The presentation reached its crescendo, the final slide outlining a bold, multi-year campaign strategy. My strategy. Brock finished with a flourish, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. "So," he said, spreading his hands wide, "that is our vision for Kronos. We believe it is unmatched, and we are ready to execute." A polite applause rippled through the boardroom. The board members looked pleased. Brock looked like he had already won. He turned to Elijah, his smile widening, ready to accept the contract and the glory. Elijah let the silence stretch for a moment, creating a pocket of dramatic tension. He looked at Brock, then at the board, his gaze sweeping across their expectant faces. Then he spoke, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the self-congratulatory atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. "An excellent presentation of the material," he said, a subtle emphasis on the word presentation. He paused. "But I have a question." Brock leaned forward eagerly. "Anything, Elijah. We're an open book." Elijah's eyes moved from Brock, past the board, and settled directly on me at the back of the room. His gaze was so direct, so focused, it was as if a spotlight had suddenly been thrown on my small, black-clad figure. The entire room followed his line of sight. "I'd like to speak directly to the architect of this strategy," he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "I'd like to speak with the owner. Miss Maddox." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. A wave of confusion washed over the faces of the board members. Sienna's adoring smile froze, then crumbled, her face draining of color as her head whipped around to stare at me. Brock's jaw unhinged. He stuttered, his smooth facade shattering into a million pieces. I don't understand," he stammered, looking back and forth between Elijah and me. She's, she's just the assistant. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a world turning upside down. Slowly, deliberately, just as I had practiced in my mind 1,000 times, I stood up. The helper was about to speak. In the ringing silence, all eyes were on me. The weight of their collective shock was a physical force, pressing in from all sides. Brock's face was a mask of utter disbelief, his brain visibly failing to compute the scene unfolding before him. Sienna looked as if she had seen a ghost, her perfectly made-up face pale and drawn. And then, a calm, steady voice cut through the tension. It was Lorna, the board secretary. She rose from her seat at the side of the room, holding a slim leather-bound folder. "Perhaps I can clarify the situation," she said, her voice even and professional. She walked to the center of the table and opened the folder, placing several documents neatly on the polished mahogany surface. The board members leaned in, their confusion turning to dawning horror. "As per the terms of our recent capital infusion agreement with the Sterling Price Investment Group," Lorna announced, her voice carrying a new and unfamiliar note of authority, "certain structural changes are underway. Mr. Rowan's presence here today is part of that transition." She slid one document towards the head of the board. "This is the signed agreement confirming that the investment group, which now holds a controlling interest in our primary competitor, Sterling Price, is owned by a holding company." She then slid another document forward. "And this," she said, her eyes finding mine for a brief triumphant moment, "is the certificate of ownership for that holding company. The sole owner is Maddox Strategies LLC." Elijah Rowan stood up, confirming her statement with a decisive nod. "To be perfectly clear," he said, his powerful voice leaving no room for argument, "Miss Briar Maddox does not work for Halston Creative. The strategy you just saw presented was developed by her agency. Maddox Strategies owns this campaign. My company, Kronos, is awarding the contract not to you, but to them. In fact, our pending merger is not with Halston Creative. It is with the new entity formed by the acquisition of Sterling Price, an entity controlled by Miss Maddox." The pieces finally clicked into place. The sound of Brock's world collapsing was a sharp, ragged intake of breath. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a desperate pleading confusion. "Briar, what is this?" he whispered. The name that was once a dismissal, now a question. Before I could answer, Elijah cut him off with a look of cold steel. "I believe you've misunderstood your position in this ecosystem, Mr. Halston." All eyes fell on my sister. Sienna looked like she might faint. Her hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes darting between me, Brock, and the damning documents on the table. In the room, I noticed for the first time, was her mother-in-law, Vanessa Kent, seated as a guest of the board. Her face, usually a mask of cruel superiority, was frozen in a state of slack-jawed shock. The woman who had called me the help was watching me execute a corporate takeover. I walked from the back of the room to the head of the table. My steps were silent on the thick carpet, but they echoed in the dead silence of the room. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, crisp business card. The logo, one my Serbian team had designed, was simple, elegant, and powerful, a stylized M with the words Maddox Strategies beneath it. I placed it on the table directly in front of Brock. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "Surprise," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of the anger he deserved. "It was something far worse. It was pity. As it turns out," I continued, letting my gaze travel from Brock to Sienna, and finally to the pale faces of the board, "you've all been working for me for the past 6 months. You just didn't know it." I let that statement hang in the air, a final, devastating blow. Brock opened his mouth, then closed it. No sound came out. Sienna let out a small, strangled sob. The empire they thought they controlled, the world in which they were kings and queens and I was a peasant, had just been revealed as a fiction. I was the architect of their reality, and I had just cancelled their lease. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of pathetic, desperate attempts at damage control. As soon as Elijah and his team concluded the meeting and swept out of the room, leaving a nuclear winter in their wake, Brock and Sienna rushed towards me. "Briar, wait," Brock pleaded, his voice cracking. "We need to talk. This is a misunderstanding." Sienna was right behind him, her eyes red and puffy. Briar, please, she begged. I don't understand what's happening. We're family. The word family hung in the air, a bitter, ironic echo of all the times she had chosen her new status over me. I looked at them, at their panicked faces, and I felt nothing. The rage had burned out long ago, leaving behind only the cold ashes of resolution. No, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I don't believe we have anything left to discuss. All future communications can go through my legal team. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own making. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Frankie. It contained only 3 words: "Proud of you, kid." That simple message meant more to me than any billion-dollar contract. It was the validation I had craved for years, not from my enemies, but from my mentor, the one person who had seen my value from the very beginning. As I was leaving the building, I nearly ran into Marcel Voss, the junior partner who had been at the wedding, the one who had snickered along with Brock, but who I knew was smart enough to have been uneasy about it. He had seen me being overworked and undercredited for years, and had chosen the path of strategic silence to protect his own career. He rushed to my side, his face a mask of practiced sincerity. "Briar, congratulations," he said, his voice slick with opportunism. "I always knew you had it in you. I told Brock for years he was underestimating you. I'm so glad to see you finally get what you deserve." He was a coward, a chameleon trying to blend into the new power structure. The old me would have been hurt by his hypocrisy. The new me simply let him expose himself. I gave him a small, knowing smile. "Thank you, Marcel," I said. "I'll be sure to remember your support when we begin restructuring." I watched him pale, the implication landing with perfect precision. I let him squirm in his own cowardice. There was no need to gloat, no need to raise my voice or make a scene. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. Walking out of that building and into the bright afternoon sun felt like taking my first breath of clean air after years spent in a suffocating windowless room. The victory wasn't loud and explosive. It was quiet, complete, and absolute. It wasn't about destroying them. It was about building something they could never touch. The best revenge wasn't a dish served cold. It was a feast I had prepared for myself, and I was just getting ready to enjoy it. I'm sitting in a quiet cafe, the kind with worn wooden tables and the rich, comforting smell of freshly ground coffee. My laptop is open, but I'm not working on a client proposal or a financial model. I'm writing a blog post for the new Maddox Strategies website. Outside, the city hums with its own relentless energy, but in here, there is a sense of peace I haven't felt in years. My team is no longer just a few freelancers scattered across the globe. We're a force. We have offices in 3 cities now, staffed with brilliant creative people who are paid what they're worth and given credit for their work. The Kronos launch was a staggering success, and our client roster now includes some of the most respected brands in the world. I still get calls and frantic emails from Sienna, from Brock, even from Vanessa Kent. They are filled with apologies, excuses, and desperate pleas for a conversation. I have my assistant field them all. I hold no anger for them anymore, only a distant, clinical pity. They are artifacts from a life I no longer live, ghosts in a past that has no power over me. My new beginning isn't about them, it's about me. It's about the quiet confidence that comes from building something with your own 2 hands, from the ground up. It's about knowing your own worth so completely that the opinions of others become irrelevant noise. I look down at my screen and type the title of my blog post, "You Don't Need to Be Loud to Win." I write about the power of silence, the strength in being underestimated. I write about how the moments of greatest pain can become the fuel for the most profound transformation. I don't mention any names. I don't have to. The story is in the success, not in the sordid details of the revenge. As I write the final words, I think back to that girl in the hotel parking lot, her face streaked with mascara, her heart shattered into a million pieces. I wish I could go back in time, put a hand on her shoulder, and tell her that her tears are watering the seeds of a future she can't even imagine. I want to tell her that every single cut, every dismissal, every moment of humiliation will be forged into the armor she will one day wear. I would tell her, "You made it. The pain was not the end of your story. It was the beginning. To anyone watching this, to anyone who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or worthless, to anyone who has had their work stolen or their voice silenced, if they have ever called you a nobody, do not argue, do not scream, build, build in silence, build in the dark, build something so powerful, so excellent, so undeniably yours, that your success becomes the only response they will ever need to hear. Let it speak louder than their insults ever could. Even when they laugh, underestimate, or erase you, silence doesn't mean weakness, it means you're working. Have you ever been underestimated, or had your hard work stolen? What did you do? Let me know in the comments. If you felt that twist hit hard, smash that like button, and subscribe for more real revenge journeys that inspire. See you in the next story, and remember, the best revenge is built in silence.